Mike Petra discusses communism
Thank you, Pastor Sanders.
on Saturday,
Brought some notes with me.
January the 10th.
There's a live mic there. You might want to stand by that.
Hey,
You don't really have to. But
you
you got to use your preacher's voice.
Okay.
yeah, I can get your
everybody
voice.
Hear me? Can you hear me in the back?
I can hear you better behind the mic.
Doug, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Better behind the
Okay,
mic.
Good, good. I don't like to use microphones. Last time I used a microphone, I got the sore throat from it.
Oh. Well, you don't have to get real close to that. It's called mic on mic.
Okay. Pastor Sanders wanted me to speak for a half hour, 45 minutes or so. So I put together a presentation which was actually in 3 parts. Part 1 was about communism, Part 2 about Islam, Part 3 about the strange marriage between communism and Islam. However, the first part of my talk about communism was based on a video titled Agenda Grinding America Down. But we're short on time, so Pastor Sanders says we can't watch that video. So the first part of my speech is talking to you about a video you're supposed to have seen, but didn't see. Okay? And then the second part of my talk is going to be on Islam, but everything you've seen, you've learned more about Islam than I could ever tell you about, because there's 2 videos for more than 3 hours long. So they stole my thunder from Islam. All right, so the first 2 parts of my talk is going to be kind of mangled. Then the third part was about, like I said, the strange marriage of communism and Islam. Before we talk too much about that, let's get our definitions straight. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. We're all using the same terms. We all have the same understanding of what we're talking about. If you listen to Pastor Sanders' radio program, Pastor Sanders has defined communism. Can anybody tell me how Pastor Sanders defines communism?
Liberalism.
I can.
That's cheating. That's cheating.
All right.
Okay. Pastor Sanders defines communism as socialism with a police state.
Amen.
And he's absolutely correct. But let's talk about what is socialism, what is fascism. Because today we have some nations under communism that are socialism with a police state. We see that in Castro's Cuba. We see that in various other nations. But more so, what we see now is a mixture of socialism and fascism with the police state. What's the difference between socialism and fascism? And how do they take hold? Let's take a look at the United States of America, for example. Early on, when they had student loans, all student loans were private. They were done through a private banking system. Then the government got involved, the federal government got involved. And once the federal government got involved, we had a marriage between business and the government. That's fascism. All right? And then what happened a few years ago with Barack Obama in office? The federal government took over the entire student loan system. So we went from a private student loan system, private American-style student loan system, to an intermediary stage, which is kind of a fascist, a mixture of private and public, to complete government takeover. Right? Social Security example of socialism. Right? Our banking system today, most of our businesses today are not capitalists. Somebody wrote a book called Capitalism. Right? What we have today is mostly fascism. Can you run a business today without the federal government being involved in it? No. So there's an unholy alliance in this country between the federal government and private business. So we are no longer a capitalistic nation. We're primarily a country that is a mixture of socialism, fascism, with a growing police state. That's why I titled my book. Some of you people know who I am, some don't. I'm an author, an editor, and a publisher. Now, I self-publish my own books, and I help other people publish their books as well. One of the books that I published was Welcome to Soviet America. It was a book that was in the back of my mind for 30 years before I finally wrote it. And over the years, I kept putting together all kinds of information, stacking books. Whenever I saw a book in the library or whatever, I would buy it. One of the books that I came across was Toward Soviet America. That's how I got the title of my book. In 1932, William Z. Foster, who was the national chairman of the Communist Party USA, wrote a book called Towards Soviet America. In that book, he laid out his vision of what a Soviet America would look like. What's a Soviet America? It's simply an American version of the Soviet Union. Karl Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx is the father of communism. He wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848. He said that communists need to adapt themselves to whatever nation they go into, because every nation has a different culture, different traditions, different form of government, different religions, and so forth. So you adapt yourself to that. And we've seen how things are going on in Europe, how things are going on in the United States are somewhat different. There's a lot of overlapping, but they're somewhat different. So the reason I titled my book, Welcome to Soviet America, is due to the fact that much of what William Z. Foster wrote about has already happened. In 1932, William Z. Foster said, in Soviet America, there will be a National Department of Education. In the 1970s, President Jimmy Carter created the U.S. Department of Education. In 1932, William G. Foster, the chairman, actually the head of the Communist Party, USA, said that a Soviet America will have a U.S. Department of Health. Jimmy Carter, 1970s, created U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He said that today, in 1932, he said that foreign-born workers are being deported and are deprived of the right to vote. He said in Soviet America, foreign-born workers, he's talking about illegal aliens. He said in Soviet America, foreign-born workers will not be deported and they'll be given the right to vote. Illegal aliens are voting all the time, illegally. He said in Soviet America, women are going to work right alongside with men. They're going to be generals in the army. Today we have female generals. He said that God will be banished from the schools and from the laboratories. Right? What happened 30 years later, 1962, the Supreme Court ruled it was unconstitutional for prayer to take place, for the school to sponsor prayer in public schools. 1963, the U.S. Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional for the Lord's Prayer to be said and for people to read from the Bible. 1980, they said it was unconstitutional to post the Ten Commandments. 1992, they said it was unconstitutional for prayer activities to occur at graduation ceremonies and at other promotional activities. And finally, in the year 2000, they said it was unconstitutional for student-led prayer to occur at a sporting event. Unbelievable. William Z. Foster predicted that 30 years before it actually happened. Each one of those court decisions is based on the so-called separation of church and state. But what does the First Amendment tell us? It says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Under separation of church and state, they're actually violating the U.S. Constitution, because the U.S. Constitution says the federal government cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion, but that's precisely what they're doing. So where do they get separation of church and state from? I know Pastor Sanders knows the answer to this. Where do they get separation of church and state from? Article 52 in the Soviet Constitution. To my knowledge, there's been 3 constitutions in the Soviet Union. The last one was, I think, 1982, and Article 52 called for a separation of church and state. All 3 other constitutions called for that. So, from my perspective, based on what William Z. Foster wrote, there's a whole bunch more of information where I could go down the line and show how the vision that William Z. Foster has for Soviet America has been achieved. They're actually in the home stretch. Another thing William Z. Foster wrote about, he says that, under communism, they break up what they call the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeoisie is the middle class. They hate the middle class. Communists hate the middle class of America, the middle class of Europe, and so does the Islamists. Why? The middle class is self-sufficient. They don't need overserves. They're independent. They're hardworking. They're honest, decent people, and they make themselves self-sufficient. So But under communism and under Islam, they want total subservience. They're predators. They're essentially predators. In my book, Welcome to Soviet America, the first couple of chapters I talked about the psychology of the sociopath, and I'm talking about communists, and I talk about the philosophy of it. And they're really, what it boils down to, if you look at the psychology of the sociopath and the psychology and the philosophy of communists, you're talking about sociopaths. They're all predators. And I talk a lot about, you know, about moral IQ. Like I said, my speech is going to be somewhat mangled because of the fact that the way I have it planned out in my mind and in my notes is I can't carry it out, so I'm going to stumble around a little bit. Let me check some more things on my notes here. You know, one thing we can talk about, people talk about communists, people talk about Marxists, and what's the difference? We could say a communist with a capital C is simply a member of the Communist Party. Like members of the Communist Party USA, members of the Communist Party of Russia, and any other nation. And a Marxist is essentially somebody who follows the principles and practices of Marxism, as laid out by Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto. But they don't necessarily join the Communist Party. And when we talk about liberals, and we talk about progressives in this country, and we talk about the liberal media, I don't call them the liberal media, I call them the Marxist media. Because the left in this country has moved so far to the left that they are now Marxists. In that video that we're going to show, it shows on the extreme left, you have communists, you have Nazis, you have fascists. And on the extreme right, you have anarchists. And anarchists want no government. Communists, Nazis, fascists want 100% totalitarian government. And in the middle, you had the Democratic Party was slightly left of center, and Republican Party slightly right of center. But in that video, it showed that both parties have moved to the left. The Republican Party is now where the Democratic Party used to be, you know, some years ago. And the Democratic Party is lined up almost perfectly with the Communist and Nazi Party. Sure. You know, people say that, you know, Nazism is a right-wing extremism. It's not. It's left-wing extremism. The Soviet Union, USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. What does Nazi stand for? National Socialist German Workers' Party. They're both socialists. And actually, Adolf Hitler studied Vladimir Lenin, saw how he seized power, and he was actually starting communism in Germany, but the people protested, so he changed it to Nazism. Instead of international communism, we're going to call themselves National Socialists. So that's what we're up against. Now let's look at the U.S. government. Let's look at the head of the U.S. government today. Who would you say is the best representative? What individual, what single individual in this country is the best representative of a marriage of Marxism and Islam? Do we have a Marxist Muslim anywhere? Barack Obama. Absolutely. Barack Obama. Let's take a look at that. If you want to look at the marriage of Marxism and the Muslim, let's look at Barack Obama. Let's study him, and that'll show you how the two merge together. All right? Let's look at the communist side. His mother was a progressive, they say. But to me, progressives, liberals are euphemisms for Marxism today. Because like I said, they move so far to the left. His grandparents were Marxists. His grandparents had him tutored, had him raised a lot by Frank Marshall Davis. Frank Marshall Davis was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party USA. And he used to read poems to Barack Obama, and he tutored him. And he used to read him poems about the glorious Soviet Red Army. This is the same Soviet Red Army that would bayonet pregnant women in Afghanistan when they invaded under Gorbachev. The same one who used to take people and stack them up like firewood, pour gasoline on them, and set them on fire. This is the Soviet Red Army, and that raped millions of German women after the Second World War, at the end of the Second World War. So he was praising the Soviet Red Army. So that's kind of the upbringing of Barack Obama. When Barack Obama, most of this occurred when he was in Hawaii. And then when he moved to Chicago, what did Barack Obama do? He joins Pastor Wright's church. He was there for about 20 years. Pastor Wright is a Marxist. You can see videos of him saying, "Goddamn America." What American would say that? All right? Barack Obama said he was never there when Pastor Wright was spewing all this venom about anti-Americanism, anti-white people. He's a racist. He's a Marxist. Most Marxists are racist, and they call us racist because we resist them. When Barack Obama became president, even when he was campaigning, he launched his political career in the living room of William Ayers. Who is William Ayers? They were friends for 20 years. William Ayers is a domestic communist terrorist. He bombed a couple dozen buildings. His wife, Bernadine Dorn, was once on the FBI 10 most wanted list. She blew up a bomb at a police station in San Francisco that killed one police officer, partially blinded and maimed another police officer. Anybody know Larry Grathwol? You can go on YouTube and confirm just about everything I'm telling you. Larry Grathwol was a Vietnam veteran who infiltrated the Weather Underground, which was co-founded by William Ayers. And he attended a meeting of about 24 top-level members of the Weather Underground. Now, you keep in mind, Barack Obama was friends with William Ayers for 20 years. William Ayers actually said Ghost wrote his book, Dreams from My Father. In that book, Barack Obama said when he attended university, he sought out the Marxist professors, right? Why would you seek out the Marxist professors? Why would he be friends with William Ayers for 20 years? Larry Grathwol said he attended a meeting where people had PhDs, master's degrees from the most prestigious universities in America. I say the most prestigious universities in Soviet America. And he said, this Larry Grathwol brought up the point, he says, what are you going to do once you take over? Because they were talking about taking over the United States by force. And he said, well, he says, we're going to invite the Cubans in, we're going to invite the Communist Chinese in, we're going to invite the Russians in, and they're all going to have different sectors. And he said, well, what are you going to do with the people who don't want to live in a communist-style or Soviet-style America? They said, well, we're going to set up re-education camps in the American Southwest. At that time, and this was in the 1970s, there were about 250 million people in the United States. He said, what are you going to do with the people who can't be re-educated? They said, well, we'll do the same thing they did in Russia, in China, we'll exterminate them. They actually said that they planned, William Ayers, Barack Obama's buddy, said they planned to exterminate 25 million Americans in the 1970s if they seized power at that time, because they would not live peacefully in a Soviet-style America. That's what we have in the White House today. William Z. Foster says in his book, in 1932, he says, they will come, or there will be a communist in the White House. And he said the Soviet flag will fly over, just like the Muslims are saying that Islam, flag of Islam will fly over. There's a lot more I could talk about in that regard, but let's just mention a few of the things.
You were mentioning something about the moral IQ, and then you stopped. What were you going to say about that?
Well, I have a whole chapter on, actually one of the initial, my book is divided into two sections. The first part I talk about what happened in Russia. And just an overview so people can see what happened. And then I have a chapter on psychology of the sociopath, where I talk about moral IQ. And just like you have a general IQ, and you can have a creative IQ, and people have mathematical IQs, there's also a moral IQ. And there are defunct terms like, you have genius and so forth, but you also have terms like the moron, which is the lowest level. Then you have the, I take the moron as the highest level of the, they call developmentally disabled. Okay, you have the moron, then under that you have the imbecile, under that you have the idiot. That's the way you used to classify people before political correctness came along.
Where's the Democrat come in?
Well, I say we can classify people on the moral IQ scale too. And what we have among Islamists who behead Christians, who recently, ISIS in Iraq and Syria is beheading children who refuse to convert to Islam. In the Soviet Union, under Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, what did we see? From 1917, 1918 to 1987, according to R.J. Rummel, Professor Emeritus from the University of Hawaii, who died recently, wrote a book called Death by Government. He said that in the Soviet Union, the communists exterminated 61,911,000 men, women, and children. Many of them were starved to death, beaten to death, shot to death, worked to death in slave labor camps. Under Mao Zedong, according to R.J. Rummel, who's, like I say, he wrote a book, Death by Government, where he studied this in detail. Under Mao Zedong and those sociopaths, they exterminated 76,702,000 men, women, and children. Again, starved to death, worked them to death, beat them to death, worked them to death in slave labor camps, again. Nazism. According to R.J. Rummel, about 20,946,000 people were killed by Nazis. Everybody talks about how terrible the Nazis were. The Nazis were amateurs when it comes to genocide compared to the Nazis. So these people, they're moral idiots. You can't go around, you can't chop a child's head off for not converting to your religion unless you're a moral idiot. So I talk about, more morons, more idiots, and more imbeciles. And you'll find them in Islam, and you'll find them in the Communist Party. You'll find them among the Marxists. You'll find them in the media, because the media won't tell you almost anything that I'm telling you today. Look at that more than 3-hour video. You can watch CNN and MSNBC, even Fox News, till you're blue in the face. You're not going to see that. You can go on YouTube. When I was doing some research, I found Pat Robertson has about a 6-minute video back in 2012. He put out about a 6-minute video where he talked about what's going on in England. He talked about the fact in that video they said 3,000 women were killed in honor killings in 1 year in Great Britain. And Pat Robertson talks about that. I sent that link out to other people that are on my email list, and I says, obviously, according to the liberals, Pat Robertson is obviously Islamophobic, right? Because he's educating people that in 1 year, 3,000 women were murdered in Great Britain simply for honor killings. In other words, they may have they're not wearing their headdress or whatever. They reject Islam when they become a Christian, or they go out with a Christian boy, whatever. They murder him. And that's happened in the United States too. It's been fairly rare here, but it has happened where fathers have killed their daughters in this country. I believe in Texas, 2008, I believe a father killed 1 or 2 of his daughters.
Yes, there were some girls too, they went to Canada to hide or something from the United States and
Yes.
killed them.
Yeah.
There was 2 cousins right here in Cleveland who killed their cousin because she talked to a non-Muslim boy.
Unbelievable.
She didn't even have a boyfriend. She just talked to him.
Yeah, and what boggles the mind, we're the feminists. The left, this shows the hypocrisy. I could really talk a lot about this. There's so much.
But you can't, you see, when you say that, you're using logic and reason. Feminism is insanity. It is insanity. They were in favor of the China's one-child policy, where they killed girls 7-1 over the boys. The now is in favor of that because it was killing. Because it was killing. And they want to do that here. Planned Parenthood recently came out and said there is never a wrong reason for abortion, that gender-based abortion is fine. In other words, and just like what's going to happen with Islam, with these guys with the jihadist baby, the girls, only 1 girl out of 10 babies is allowed to live because they need the boys for the jihad.
Like you said, Pastor, I hear you on the radio program, I'm saying communism and death go hand in hand. Yes, sir.
There's one media who always tells the truth. It's Fox News.
Fox News. Yeah.
More than the...
Yeah, more than the others, but they are center right.
Sean
They don't go-
Hannity.
Sean Hannity, I give him credit. He really talked about William Ayers, and he really talked about
He was
Jeremiah
fighting
Wright.
a mom from UK a couple days ago. You saw that interview? He attacked that mom from UK. He did attack him.
Okay, yeah, Sean Hannity is the bravest soul, really, and Fox News.
And Sean Hannity told him, he said, I'm not going to convert. And he said, come and get me. He said, I'm not afraid of you. Come and get me right now.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I talk about moral IQ. These people, and I use the term moral insanity. These people are morally insane. Pastor John Hagee had used that term. Yeah, moral insanity. And that's what we have in this country.
You
That's
can't even reason with
No.
those type of people.
No,
It's just
no.
like,
they have very low moral IQs, and some are so moral IQ is so low you can declare them morally insane. Because like it says, a fellow Christian sent me some emails not too long ago, and I really didn't send it out to anybody else, and he said he'd be reluctant to do so. He talked about ISIS, and he showed photograph after photograph after photograph of beheaded people in Iraq and in Syria as a result of ISIS. Heads all over the place. And there's one of a child, a headless child. Who would do that to a child? You have to be morally insane. You have to have a moral IQ in the single digits. Let's look a little bit more about Barack Obama and communism. Barack Obama said he wanted to redistribute the wealth, right? Before you can redistribute the wealth, you have to confiscate. When he's talking about redistributing wealth, he's not talking about his wealth, he's talking about your wealth. Right? And he's not talking about the wealth of the super rich. He's talking about the middle class. Take their money and give it to the proletariat. You have the bourgeoisie, I talked about, is the middle class and the proletariat. And what they do is they create all these proletariat groups. Remember we talked about the restriction of liberty, the restriction of free speech in England and all these other nations, and France as a result of Islam. That's why they brought Islam, the leaders, the Marxist leaders of Europe brought Islam in there to create a proletariat that's going to create restriction of liberty. What Marxism and what Islam have in common is a searing hatred of Christians, of Christianity. So they're working together to destroy Christianity. And Barack Obama is that marriage of communism and Marxism.
what happens when you just have the two, they're in control? One of them's got to take over the other.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I mean,
the intermediary is a friend. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So they're joining forces to destroy us. Then once we're destroyed, this is what I suspect. And as I talk more, I'm going to talk more about how they actually see things eye to eye. What did the Marxists do in this country? They infiltrated and took over Christianity, right? You have the social gospel movement started by the Protestants, early 1900s, maybe even 1800s. Then the Catholics came up with liberation theology, which they imported to the Marxists in South America in the 1960s. So you have people like the Reverend Al Sharpton, the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, right? They're Marxists. They've infiltrated, they've taken over. You know, Pastor Sanders talks about calling them the apostate churches. They're all run by Marxists. I think there are more churches in this country, so-called Christian churches, headed by Marxists than by Christians. They're going to do the same thing to Islam.
and we're Catholic, I mean, and we're both were born
I was
in the
raised
beginning
Catholic.
of the 60s, and you could see the Catholic Church. It's just like,
Right? The Pope's going to come out with an encyclical on climate change. What's he going to say?
right.
Right?
I'm
The
gonna
purpose
say-
of global warming is global government. Al Gore even admitted it. You can go on YouTube and find a video of him saying the purpose of global warming is global government. It's going to lead to global agreements and global government. And they talk about the restrictions of liberty. That's why they create all these proletariat groups, and they say, well, we need a huge Soviet-style bureaucracy to protect the black proletariat from white bourgeoisie, white racists. We need a huge Soviet-style bureaucracy to protect women from these sexist men. We need a huge Soviet-style bureaucracy to protect the environment from businesses, right? And they're going to control all businesses and all of our activities. You know, they're under the United Nations. They want to control. The government already controls how much water you can put in your toilet, right? They want to control all water that comes out of your home, based on environmentalism. They want to control the air that we